If you're listening to this at night, I just want you to know something. Most people hear black magic and picture movie stuff, candles, chanting, dramatic thunder. But the stories I'm about to tell you don't feel like movies. They feel like the kind of memories that follow you for years. The kind you don't bring up at parties. The kind you only admit out loud when you're sure nobody will laugh. These are 3 disturbing, true black magic horror stories from real life. And if you're the type of person who likes to test things, who likes to mess with what you don't understand, just remember. Sometimes the scariest part isn't what you see. It's what starts seeing you back. I used to rent a small basement apartment behind a quiet house in a nice neighborhood. It was cheap, clean enough, and it had one big advantage. It was private. The landlord was a middle-aged woman named Marisol. She lived upstairs with her teenage son, and we barely crossed paths. She was polite, but distant. She always spoke with a careful smile, like she was reading from a script. The basement had 2 rooms, a tiny kitchen, and a bathroom with a metal drain in the floor. The windows were small, just strips of glass near the ceiling that let in a blue-gray light during the day. At first, it felt cozy. Then I started noticing little things. The first thing was the smell. Every now and then, usually late at night, I'd catch this sudden sour odor in the kitchen. It wasn't rotten food exactly. It was sharp, like vinegar and old pennies. It would come and go, and I couldn't track it down. I cleaned everything. I threw out groceries. I checked the trash. Nothing. Then there were the sounds. Basement apartments always have noises. Pipes. Floorboards. The upstairs people walking around. But this was different. Sometimes, when the lights were off and I was lying in bed, I'd hear something very faint from the kitchen. A soft tapping. Not random. Not like a pipe knocking. It was steady, slow, like a fingernail on glass. Tap, tap, tap. The first time it happened, I held my breath and listened until it stopped. The second time, I got up and walked out, phone light in my hand, and stood in the doorway of the kitchen. Everything looked normal. The sink was empty. The counters were clean. But the smell was there again, sharp and sour. And the tapping was coming from beneath the sink. I crouched down and opened the cabinet. There was nothing under there except the water pipes and a couple cleaning bottles I owned. The tapping stopped the second the cabinet door swung open. I stared into that dark space for a long time, waiting for it to start again. Nothing. I closed the cabinet and went back to bed. I told myself I was tired. I told myself the building was settling. But over the next week, it got worse. The smells showed up more often. The tapping became louder. And then, the dreams started. They weren't like normal bad dreams. They were heavy. Thick. Like someone poured cold syrup over my brain. In the dreams, I was always in my apartment. The same rooms. The same dim lighting. But something was wrong. The kitchen would be slightly different. A cabinet would be open. A chair would be turned the wrong way. And every time, I'd feel like I wasn't alone. I'd hear breathing. Not mine. Slow, quiet breathing, like someone standing just behind me. I'd turn around, and the dream would do that thing where your body won't move right. Like you're underwater. And in the kitchen, under the sink, something would be tapping from inside the cabinet. Tap, tap, tap. Then I'd wake up with my heart hammering and my throat dry. That's when the scratches started appearing. At first, I noticed 3 thin red lines on my forearm. I assumed I'd done it in my sleep. Then the next morning, there were more, 2 on my ribs, like someone dragged a fingernail under my shirt. I kept my nails trimmed. I didn't sleep with jewelry. I didn't have a cat. I started sleeping with my lights on. I started locking my bedroom door even though I lived alone. And I started feeling watched. Not in a paranoid way. In a real way. Like when you walk past a dark window and you can't stop yourself from glancing at your reflection, because something in you expects to see someone behind it. One night I came home from work and found my kitchen cabinet under the sink open. I know I closed it. I always closed it. The hinge squeaked, and it bothered me, so I made a habit of shutting it firmly. But it was open. Just a few inches. Like someone had opened it and left it that way on purpose. The smell hit me right away, stronger than ever. Sharp and sour and metallic. I stood there with my keys still in my hand, staring at that cabinet door, feeling my pulse in my ears. Then I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Coming from inside. I didn't want to open it. I stood there for a full minute, frozen, listening to that steady tapping. My skin felt tight, like it didn't fit right. Finally, I took a step forward and yanked the cabinet open. The tapping stopped instantly. But this time, there was something new. Pushed deep into the back corner, half hidden behind the pipes, was a glass jar. It wasn't my jar. It was small, like something you'd put spices in. The lid was screwed on tight, and the glass was cloudy, like it had been buried in dirt and washed off. Inside was a dark liquid, and floating in it was hair. A thick twist of hair, like someone had cut off a small braid and stuffed it in there. There were also little scraps of paper, soaked and curled, with ink bleeding into the liquid. And something else. Something pale. At first I thought it was a clump of wax. Then I leaned closer and realized it was a tooth. A human tooth. My stomach turned so hard I thought I was going to throw up. I pulled the jar out with 2 fingers like it was radioactive, and set it on the counter. My hands were shaking. I stared at it, trying to make sense of it. The only person who could have put it there was Marisol. But why? I marched upstairs and knocked on her door. No answer. I knocked again, harder. Finally, she opened it just a crack. She looked irritated, like I'd interrupted something important. "What?" she said. I held up the jar. "What is this?" I asked, and my voice sounded thin and strange. The moment she saw it, her expression changed. Not surprise. Not confusion. Something else. Like annoyance, mixed with fear. She stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind her. "Where did you find that?" she asked quietly. "Under my sink," I said. "In my apartment." "What is it?" She stared at the jar for a long time without touching it. Then she said, "You shouldn't have opened that cabinet." I laughed, but it came out wrong. "Are you serious right now? Why is this in my home?" Marisol took a breath like she was deciding whether to tell the truth. Then she said, "It's not for you." "What do you mean it's not for me?" "It was placed there before you moved in," she said. "It was hidden. You weren't supposed to find it." I stared at her. "So you knew?" Her eyes flicked toward the street, like she was checking who might be listening. "Listen," she said, lowering her voice. "Some people do things when they feel wronged. They leave something behind. Something that stays. My mouth went dry. Are you telling me this is black magic? She didn't answer directly. She just said, "Put it back." No, I said immediately. No way. I'm getting rid of this. Marisol's face tightened. You don't just throw it away. Why not? Because it follows the one who moves it, she said, and her voice was suddenly flat. That's how it works. I felt a cold wave crawl up my back. I wanted to believe she was messing with me. But the jar was real. The tooth was real. The hair was real. And so were the scratches on my body. So what do I do? I asked. Marisol looked at me like she'd already decided she didn't want to be involved. Then she said, You take it to someone who knows. Like who? She hesitated. Then she gave me an address. It was across town, in an area with small shops and older buildings. She said, Ask for Lucia. That night I didn't sleep. I left the jar on the kitchen counter, wrapped in a plastic bag like that made it safer. I kept hearing tapping. But it wasn't coming from under the sink anymore. It was coming from the jar. Soft little clicks, like fingernails against glass, from inside. Tap, tap, tap. I sat on my bed staring at the kitchen doorway until sunrise. The next day, I drove to the address. It was a tiny storefront between a bakery and a phone repair place. The window had candles and little bundles of herbs hanging from strings. Inside, it smelled like smoke and plants. An older woman sat behind the counter, reading. She looked up when the bell rang. I told her my name. I told her Marisol sent me. The woman, Lucia, didn't smile. She just watched me. Then her gaze dropped to the plastic bag in my hands. What did you bring? She asked. I placed the bag on the counter and pulled out the jar. The moment Lucia saw it, she stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. She didn't touch the jar. She didn't even lean close. She just stared at it like it was alive. Where was it kept? She asked. Under my sink, I said. Lucia's lips pressed into a thin line. Then she said, Who lives above you? My landlord, I said. Marisol. Lucia gave a slow nod, like that confirmed something. Then she said, This is a binding jar. A what? It ties something to a place, she said. And it ties a person to it. My throat tightened. A person? Who? Lucia finally looked up at me. And she said, Whoever's hair is inside. I swallowed. It's not mine. Lucia's eyes stayed on mine. Are you sure? I felt my chest go cold. Yes. I'm sure. Lucia reached under the counter and pulled out a small pouch of white powder. She sprinkled a thin ring around the jar without touching it. Then she said, You said you've had dreams. I nodded. Scratches. I nodded again. Lucia's voice dropped. Has anyone called your name at night? My skin prickled. Because, yes. 2 nights ago, I'd been half asleep when I heard it. A whisper, clear as day, from somewhere near the kitchen. My name. Soft, stretched, like someone learning how to say it. I didn't tell Lucia that yet, but my face must have. She nodded like she already knew. Lucia said, You opened the cabinet. You found it. That means it noticed you. I felt sick. So what do I do? Lucia said. You don't take it back. Marisol's words echoed in my head. It follows the one who moves it. Lucia opened a drawer and pulled out a bundle of something wrapped in cloth. She said, "You leave it with me." I hesitated. "And then it's over?" Lucia didn't answer right away. Then she said, "It depends." "On what?" She looked at the jar again, and her voice turned even quieter. "On whether it was meant to harm someone, or to keep something trapped." My breath caught. "Keep something trapped?" Lucia nodded. "Sometimes people use jars like this to punish," she said. "But sometimes they use them to contain." I stared at the cloudy glass, at the tooth floating inside. My voice came out small. "Contain what?" Lucia didn't say the word. She just leaned closer, not to the jar, but to me, and said, "If it was containing something, and you moved it, you may have loosened it." I felt dizzy. I left the jar with Lucia. She told me to go home, clean the apartment with salt water, and not to speak about the jar aloud inside the basement. That night, I did everything she said. I mopped the floors with salt water. I sprinkled salt along the window ledges. I tried to keep my mind calm. And for a few hours it felt quieter. No sour smell. No tapping. I thought maybe it worked. Then, around 2:30 in the morning, I woke up to a sound. It was coming from the kitchen. A slow, wet scraping sound. Like someone dragging something heavy across tile. I lay there, frozen, listening. The sound stopped. Then I heard breathing. Not mine. Right outside my bedroom door. I stared at the thin line of light under the door, and I saw a shadow move across it. Someone was standing there. My heart slammed so hard I thought it would give me away. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. Then the shadow leaned closer to the door. And a voice, low and soft, whispered my name. It said it like it had been practicing. I squeezed my eyes shut and covered my mouth with my hand. The voice whispered again, closer. Then I heard a faint tapping. Not from the sink. Not from the jar. From inside the walls. Tap, tap, tap. Like something trying to find a way in. The next day, I called Lucia, shaking. She answered like she'd been expecting it. She told me, "It's looking for what it lost." "What did it lose?" I asked. And Lucia said, "The place it was tied to." I moved out 2 days later. I didn't wait for the lease. I didn't argue. I packed my things in the daylight and left. But here's the part one still can't explain. For weeks after I moved, my new apartment was fine. No tapping. No sour smell. No dreams. I thought I'd escaped. Then one night, I was washing dishes, and I dropped a spoon. It rolled under the sink. I knelt down and opened the cabinet to grab it. And taped to the back wall of the cabinet, inside my new place, was a small, damp piece of paper. It looked old. It had ink smeared across it. But I could still read one word. My name. When I was in college, I dated a girl named Syra for about 6 months. She was quiet, but not shy. She had this calm way of speaking that made people lean in to listen. We met through mutual friends, and at first, everything felt normal. We watched movies, got food, did the usual couple stuff. But there was a part of her life she kept locked away. Her family. She mentioned them sometimes, but never in detail. If I asked questions, she'd change the subject. If I joked about meeting her parents someday, she'd smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. One night, I noticed something on her wrist. a thin black thread tied around it, like a bracelet. What's that? I asked. Syra glanced down like she'd forgotten it was there. It's nothing, she said. It looks tight, I said. Doesn't it bother you? She shrugged. It's supposed to be tight. I laughed a little. Why? She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, My aunt tied it. The way she said, Aunt, made it sound like a warning. I tried to keep my tone light. For what? Like luck? Syra hesitated. Then she said, For protection. That should have been the end of it. But after that, I started noticing other things. Little rules. If we went out at night, she always carried a tiny pouch in her purse. She never let me touch it. If we passed the graveyard, she would hold her breath until we were on the other side. If someone complimented her, like, You look really pretty today, she'd touch her own hair and quietly say something under her breath. One day, I asked her straight up, What are you doing when you say that? She looked embarrassed. It's just something I grew up with. What, like superstitions? Syra's face tightened. She didn't like that word. Not superstition, she said quietly. Just rules. I wanted to understand her, so I didn't push too hard. But the more time passed, the more I felt like there was something darker under all of it. The first real crack happened when we went to her friend's apartment for a small dinner. There were 5 of us, sitting around a table, talking and laughing. It was a normal night. Then one of her friends, joking around, pulled out a small deck of cards and suggested we do a silly little thing, where you ask a question and draw a card for an answer. Syra went still. Her smile faded. No, she said immediately. Her friend laughed. It's just cards. Syra's hand tightened around her glass. I said no, she repeated, sharper this time. Everyone got quiet for a second. I tried to smooth it over. It's fine, I said. Let's just not. Syra stared at the cards like they were a snake. On the way home, she didn't speak much. When we got back to my car, she finally said, Don't do things like that around me. Like what? I asked gently. Inviting things, she said. I frowned. Inviting what? Syra looked at me, and in the dim parking lot light, her eyes looked almost wet. Stuff that listens, she said. I didn't know what to say to that. I thought she meant it metaphorically. I wish I had asked more questions. Because 2 weeks later, I met her aunt. It happened by accident. Syra and I were at the mall, and she suddenly stopped walking. She stared ahead like she'd seen a ghost. I followed her gaze and saw an older woman standing near a jewelry kiosk. The woman was watching Syra like she had been waiting. Syra whispered, That's her. Your aunt? I asked. Syra nodded, and her hand tightened around mine. The aunt approached. She was small, with a hard face and sharp eyes. She wore simple clothes, but she had this heavy presence, like the air around her was thicker. When she got close, she looked at me, then at Syra. She spoke in a calm voice. So this is him. Syra didn't answer. The aunt held out her hand towards Syra's wrist. Syra instinctively pulled back. The aunt's eyes narrowed. You still wear it, she said, nodding at the black thread. Syra forced a smile. Yes. The aunt looked at me again. What's your name? She asked. I told her. She repeated it slowly, like she was tasting it. Then she smiled. It was the kind of smile that doesn't mean anything good. Come, she said to Syra. We need to talk. Syra's face went pale. I'm busy, Syra said quickly. The ant cut her off. Now. Syra looked at me like she was asking permission to breathe. I said, It's okay. I'll wait. They walked a short distance away, but I could still see them. The ant spoke low, and Syra kept shaking her head. Then the ant reached into her bag and pulled something out. A small bundle wrapped in cloth. She held it out to Syra. Syra didn't want to take it. But the ant didn't move. Finally, Syra took it with shaking hands. The ant said something that made Syra's eyes widen. Then the ant turned and walked away like she just finished a casual errand. Syra came back to me, breathing hard. What was that? I asked. She swallowed. Nothing. Syra, you're shaking. She looked around the mall like she expected someone to be standing behind us. She gave me something, she whispered, and I can't throw it away. That night, Syra came over to my apartment. She brought the cloth bundle. She placed it on my kitchen table like it might bite her. I asked her to open it. She refused. I'm not supposed to, she said. Then why did you bring it here? Syra's eyes filled with tears. Because she knows where I live, she whispered. And I don't want it in my room. I felt frustration and fear mixing together. Syra, what is going on? She took a long breath. Then she said, My aunt does things. Like what? Syra looked down at her hands. She helps people, she said, but her voice sounded like she didn't believe her own words. People go to her when they want something. When they want someone to suffer. When they want someone to stay. I stared at the bundle. You mean black magic? Syra flinched like the words burned. Yes, she whispered. I sat down slowly. Why would she give you something like that? Syra's voice trembled. Because she doesn't like me dating you. My stomach dropped. Why? Syra hesitated, then said, Because she thinks you'll leave. And she thinks that if you leave, I'll be easier to control. I didn't fully understand what she meant, but the fear in her face was enough. I said, Open it. Let's see what it is. Syra shook her head quickly. No. If we open it, it's activated. I was trying to be logical. It's a cloth bundle, Syra. Her voice rose. You don't get it. I softened my tone. Okay. Then what do we do? Syra wiped her face and said, We bury it. Far away. So that's what we did. At midnight, we drove to a wooded area near the edge of town. It wasn't deep forest, but it was dark enough that the street lights didn't reach. We parked near a trailhead. The air was cold, and the trees creaked with wind. Syra brought a small shovel from my trunk. We walked off the trail a bit, our phone flashlights cutting thin paths through the brush. Every sound felt too loud. A snapping twig. Leaves crunching. Our own breathing. Finally, Syra stopped near a cluster of trees. Here, she whispered. We dug a small hole. The soil was damp and heavy. Syra's hands shook the entire time. When the hole was deep enough, she placed the cloth bundle inside without unwrapping it. Then she froze. Do you hear that? She whispered. I listened. At first, nothing. Then, very faint, something like a whisper in the trees. Not words. Just breathy sound, like a crowd far away. Cyrus' eyes went wide. "Hurry," she whispered. We covered the hole fast, packing dirt down with our hands. Syra touched her wrist thread and whispered something I couldn't understand. Then we rushed back to the car. As soon as we got inside, Syra locked the doors and stared at the windshield like she expected something to appear in front of us. I drove her home. For a few days after that, things seemed okay. Syra was quieter than usual, but she smiled more. Like the fear had lifted a little. Then, a week later, she called me at 3 a.m. Her voice was shaking so badly I could barely understand her. "It's in my hair," she whispered. "What?" I said, sitting up. "It's in my hair," she repeated, crying. "I can feel it." I drove to her apartment immediately. When she opened the door, she looked wrecked, eyes red, skin pale. She pulled me into the bathroom. Under the bright light, she tilted her head forward. And I saw it. Woven into her hair, near the scalp, were thin black threads. Not like a hair tie. Not like a clip. Threads. Knotted and twisted, like someone had braided them in while she slept. I reached toward them. Syra grabbed my wrist. "Don't," she said. "If you pull them out wrong, it gets worse." My throat went tight. "How did this happen?" Syra shook her head, tears dropping onto the sink. "I buried it," she whispered. "I did it right. I didn't know what to do. I suggested the police." Syra laughed, one short, broken sound. "You can't call the police about this," she said. "They'll think I'm crazy." I stared at the threads. They looked old. Rough. Like they'd been soaked and dried. Then I noticed something else. Tiny specks of dirt around the knots. The same dark, damp dirt from the woods. My blood ran cold. "Syra, did you go back there?" She shook her head hard. "No." Then her eyes flicked to the mirror. And she whispered, "But someone did." Over the next few weeks, strange things happened. Syra's moods shifted like a storm. Some days she'd be normal, laughing. Other days she'd sit on her bed staring at nothing, whispering under her breath. She started getting bruises, small, finger-shaped bruises on her arms. She said she didn't know where they came from. Then she started hearing someone calling her from outside her apartment door at night. Not knocking. Just a voice. Low, soft, familiar. My voice. But I wasn't there. One night she recorded it on her phone. She played it for me the next day. And I swear to you, it sounded like me. It said her name the exact way I did. Soft, like a private joke. And then it laughed. Not my laugh. Something drier. Something wrong. Syra's aunt called her around that time. Syra put it on speaker. The aunt's voice was calm, almost sweet. "You buried my gift," she said. Syra started shaking. "You shouldn't have done that," the aunt continued. "Now it's restless." Syra's voice broke. "Please stop." The aunt laughed softly. "I didn't start anything," she said. "I just gave you a thread. You're the one who pulled." Syra hung up and threw her phone across the room. Then she looked at me with this empty fear. "She wants you gone," she whispered. "And if you don't leave, she'll make you leave." I tried to be brave. I told Syra I wasn't going anywhere. I told her I didn't believe a person could control our lives with a bundle of cloth. But deep down, I was starting to believe something. Because things started happening to me too. I began waking up with dirt under my fingernails. I began finding thin black threads in my pockets, even after doing laundry. And one morning, I looked in my car's rearview mirror and saw a black thread tied around the base of the mirror, knotted so tight I had to cut it off. Syra begged me to end things. Not because she didn't care. Because she was terrified. And then something happened that finally broke me. I was at work, alone in the break room, heating food in the microwave. The overhead lights flickered once. Then twice. Then they went steady again. I glanced down at my wrist. Tied around it was a thin black thread. I didn't put it there. I would have felt it. It was tight, like it had been pulled hard. I ripped it off so fast it left a red mark. I threw it in the trash. That night, Syra called me, sobbing. "She's outside," she whispered. "Who?" "My aunt," she said. "She's outside my building." I drove over and parked across the street. I saw her. A small figure standing under a streetlight, not moving. Just staring up at Syra's apartment. I got out of my car and walked toward her. My heart was pounding, but anger pushed me forward. "Leave her alone," I said. The aunt turned her head slowly to look at me. Up close, her eyes were darker than they should have been, like the pupils were too wide. She smiled. "You're stubborn," she said. "What do you want?" I snapped. She tilted her head. "I want her safe," she said. "You're hurting her." The aunt's smile didn't change. "Things hurt when they resist," she said calmly. "She belongs with family." I clenched my fists. "You're sick." The aunt stepped closer. And she said something that made my stomach drop. "Check your pockets," she whispered. My breath caught. I didn't want to. But I did. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small cloth bundle. The same kind we buried. Damp. Smelling like soil. My hands went numb. The aunt leaned in and spoke softly like she was giving friendly advice. "You can keep fighting," she said. "Or you can leave and live a normal life." I stared at the bundle, shaking. Behind me, across the street, I saw Syra watching from her window, her face white. That was the night I ended it. Not because I stopped loving her. Because I was scared of what staying would do to both of us. Syra didn't beg me to stay. She just looked relieved and broken. I dropped her off, and as she closed the car door, she whispered, "I'm sorry." I drove home feeling hollow. For months, I tried to move on. But sometimes, late at night, I'd find a thin black thread on my pillow. Or tied around my doorknob. Or hanging from my car mirror again. And once, just once, I woke up and found a single black thread wrapped around my finger, tight enough to cut circulation. I tore it off and threw it away. But the worst part? I never told anyone where we buried that bundle. Only Syra and I knew. And last year, out of nowhere, I got a message request online. No profile picture. No friends. Just a blank account. The message said, "Stop pulling. Some knots don't undo." Attached was a photo. A photo of the spot in the woods where we buried the bundle. The dirt was disturbed. And lying on top of the ground, clearly visible, were those same black threads. Arranged neatly into one word. My name. I'm going to tell you this story exactly the way my cousin Armand told it to me. He swore it was true. He swore on his life, on his mother, on everything. And the way he told it, I believed him. Armin worked as a security guard at a storage facility on the edge of the city. It was one of those places with long rows of metal doors, bright floodlights, and cameras everywhere. Most nights were boring. He'd sit in a small office, watch the monitors, do patrols, and drink cheap coffee. The facility stayed open late, but after midnight, it was basically empty. One night, a new customer showed up just before closing. A man in his late 30s, well-dressed, polite, with tired eyes. He filled out the paperwork quickly and paid in cash. He rented one of the larger units near the back, Unit 44. He didn't bring anything that night. He just signed, smiled, and said he'd return tomorrow. Armin didn't think much of it. The next day, the man returned with a van. He unloaded boxes by himself. Heavy boxes, taped up tight. Armin offered to help. The man smiled and said, "No, thank you." Armin watched him from a distance. The boxes weren't labeled. And the man moved carefully, like he didn't want to drop anything. After he finished, the man stood at the open unit door for a long moment, looking inside like he was making sure something was exactly right. Then he closed it, locked it, and left. That should have been it. I'm going to tell you this story exactly the way my cousin Armin told it to me. He swore it was true. He swore on his life, on his mother, on everything. And the way he told it, I believed him. Armin worked as a security guard at a storage facility on the edge of the city. It was one of those places with long rows of metal doors, bright floodlights, and cameras everywhere. Most nights were boring. He'd sit in a small office, watch the monitors, do patrols, and drink cheap coffee. The facility stayed open late, but after midnight, it was basically empty. One night, a new customer showed up just before closing. A man in his late 30s, well-dressed, polite, with tired eyes. He filled out the paperwork quickly and paid in cash. He rented one of the larger units near the back, Unit 44. He didn't bring anything that night. He just signed, smiled, and said he'd return tomorrow. Armin didn't think much of it. The next day, the man returned with a van. He unloaded boxes by himself. Heavy boxes, taped up tight. Armin offered to help. The man smiled and said, "No, thank you." Armin watched him from a distance. The boxes weren't labeled. And the man moved carefully, like he didn't want to drop anything. After he finished, the man stood at the open unit door for a long moment, looking inside like he was making sure something was exactly right. Then he closed it, locked it, and left. That should have been it. But a week later, the strange calls began. Armin would be on his night shift, and the office phone would ring. When he answered, there'd be silence. Then a slow breathing sound. Not like a prank. Like someone holding the phone close to their mouth and just breathing. Armin would say, "Hello?" No answer. Just breathing. Then a faint tapping sound. Tap, tap, tap. Armin told his manager. They assumed it was kids. They told him to ignore it. Then the cameras started acting up. On the monitors, Unit 44's camera would flicker. Only that one. It would glitch, freeze, and then return. Armin would rewind footage and see nothing unusual. Until one night. One night, around 2 a.m., Unit 44's camera froze. Then it came back. And on the screen, right in front of Unit 44's door, was a shadow. A human shadow. But there was no person. Armin zoomed in. The floodlight above the unit was on. The concrete was empty. No movement. No legs, no body, nothing. Just a shadow on the ground, as if someone invisible was standing there. Armin stared at it, trying to make sense of it. Then the shadow moved. Not like a person shifting. Like it was sliding. Dragging itself across the ground toward the unit door. Armin felt his throat go dry. He grabbed his flashlight and radio and stepped outside. The air was cold and still. The floodlights buzzed overhead. He walked fast toward the back row. As he got closer, he could hear something faint. A tapping noise. Coming from somewhere near Unit 44. Tap, tap, tap. His skin prickled. He turned the corner and saw the unit. The door was closed. The lock was in place. The area looked empty. But on the concrete in front of the door, the shadow was there. Even in real life. Armin said he froze so hard his legs locked. Because the shadow didn't match anything. It didn't match the floodlight poles. It didn't match his own body. It looked like a person standing close to the door, hunched slightly, head tilted. But the space above it was empty. Armin raised his flashlight and shined it directly on the shadow. The shadow didn't disappear. It didn't change shape. It stayed exactly where it was. Then he heard a whisper. Not in the air. In his ear. A voice he couldn't recognize said, "Don't look at me." Armin ran. He didn't even remember turning around. He just bolted back to the office, slammed the door, and locked it. He sat there breathing hard, staring at the monitors. On the screen, the shadow remained in front of Unit 44 for another minute. Then it slid back, and faded into the darkness like it was sinking into the concrete. The next day, Armin told his manager he was quitting. The manager laughed and said he was being dramatic. Armin stayed, only because he needed the money. But he avoided Unit 44. He didn't patrol near it unless he had to. And he stopped rewinding the footage. A few nights later, the well-dressed man returned. He showed up around 11 p.m., later than usual, carrying a single box. Armin watched him on the cameras. The man walked straight to Unit 44. He unlocked it and stepped inside. Then he paused in the doorway and looked over his shoulder. Right into the camera. Right into Armin's eyes through the screen. The man smiled. Then he raised his hand slowly, and waved at the camera like he knew Armin was watching. Armin felt ice in his veins. He didn't know why, but he got the sense that the man wasn't waving at him. He was waving at something behind him. The man stepped fully inside and closed the door. The camera feed glitched. When it returned, the unit door was closed and locked again. Armin tried to calm himself down. He told himself it was coincidence. He told himself the shadow thing had been a trick of the light. Then the phone rang. Armin stared at it. It rang again. He answered, forcing his voice steady. "Storage facility," he said. Silence. Then the breathing. Slow and heavy. And underneath it, tapping. Tap, tap, tap. Armin's voice shook. "Who is this?" The line stayed quiet. Then a voice whispered, low and clear. "Borrowed shadows don't like being seen." Armin's stomach dropped. The call ended. Armin sat there staring at the phone like it had teeth. The next day, he finally did something he'd avoided. He looked up the customer information for Unit 44. The man's name was listed as Navidar. The address was a P.O. box. The phone number went nowhere. It wasn't real. That night, Armand brought a coworker with him on patrol. He told the coworker he just felt uneasy and wanted company. They walked the rows together, flashlights bouncing over metal doors. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. When they reached Unit 44, Armand's coworker stopped. "Do you feel that?" he asked. Armand's throat tightened. "Feel what?" His coworker frowned. "Like pressure. Like the air is thick here." Armand nodded slowly. Then, without warning, the coworker's flashlight flickered off. He hit it. It came back on. Then it flickered again. And again. Armand's radio crackled with static. They stood there, looking at the door. Then a sound came from inside Unit 44. Not tapping. Scratching. Long, slow scratches against metal, like something dragging nails along the inside of the door. Armand's coworker backed up. "What is that?" he whispered. Armand swallowed. "I don't know." The scratching stopped. Then there was a soft thud from inside, like something heavy dropped to the floor. Then, a whisper. Muffled, but still clear. It sounded like someone speaking right up against the metal from the other side. It said, "Let me wear you." Armand's coworker cursed and grabbed Armand's arm. They hurried back to the office. Armand told his coworker everything. The coworker laughed nervously and said they should call the police. But what would they say? Something is scratching inside a locked storage unit? So Armand did the only thing he could think of. He waited for the man to return. 2 nights later, the man showed up again, just before midnight. Armand watched him walk toward Unit 44. This time, Armand stepped outside and intercepted him. "Excuse me," Armand said, trying to sound professional. "We've been having some issues near your unit." The man looked at him calmly. "Issues?" Armand swallowed. "Strange noises. Camera problems. I just wanted to check if everything inside is okay." The man studied Armand for a moment. Then he smiled. "Yes," he said. "Everything is fine." Armand forced himself to continue. "Would you mind opening it? Just so I can." The man's smile faded, and the air around them felt colder. "You don't need to see inside," the man said softly. Armand's mouth went dry. "Sir, if something is wrong." The man stepped closer. He lowered his voice. "What did you see?" he asked. Armand didn't answer. The man's eyes narrowed, almost curious. Then he said, "Some doors are meant to stay shut. Not to hide things from you, but to protect you from them." Armand felt his hands shaking. The man turned toward Unit 44. He placed his hand on the door like he was calming an animal. And he whispered something under his breath. A string of words Armand didn't recognize. Then the man looked at Armand again. He smiled like everything was normal. "You're safe," he said. "As long as you don't stare at shadows that aren't yours." Armand's skin crawled. The man opened the unit and stepped inside. Armand stood outside, frozen, trying not to look into the darkness. He heard the man move around. He heard the sound of something shifting, like fabric being dragged across concrete. Then the man said clearly, from inside, "Not this one." There was a pause. Then he said, "This one is too loud." Another pause. Then he laughed softly. "Oh," he said. "This one likes you." Armand couldn't breathe. He backed away from the door. The man stepped out and closed it again. He locked it with a firm click. Then he looked straight at Armin and said, "If you quit, it will follow you." Armin's voice cracked. "What?" The man tilted his head. "It's used to you now," he said. "You watched it. You noticed it. That's a kind of invitation." Armin shook his head. "No. No, I'm done." The man smiled gently. "Then don't leave angry," he said. "Leave quietly. Like you were never here." That was the last night Armin worked there. He didn't tell his manager. He didn't finish paperwork. He just walked out at the end of his shift and never came back. For a while, he thought it was over. Then, about a month later, Armin told me something that still makes me uncomfortable when I think about it. He said he started noticing his shadow behaving strangely. At first, it was small things. His shadow would lag behind him slightly under streetlights. Or it would stretch in a way that didn't match the angle of the light. He told himself it was his imagination. Then one evening, he was walking home, and he passed a brightly lit shop window. He glanced at his reflection. And behind him, on the sidewalk, he saw his shadow. But it wasn't matching him. His body in the reflection was standing still. But the shadow behind him lifted its hand and waved. Armin told me he spun around so fast he nearly fell. There was nobody there. Just empty sidewalk. He turned back to the window. His reflection looked normal. But his shadow was still waving, slow and steady, like it was greeting someone. Then it stopped. And it leaned forward slightly, like it was peering up at him. Armin ran home and didn't leave his apartment for 2 days. When he finally did, he covered his lights, avoided street lamps, and tried not to look at the ground. But one night, he woke up and felt something cold on his chest. He opened his eyes and saw a shape in the darkness. Not a person. A darker patch of dark, clinging to his body like a blanket. He said it felt heavy, like a weight pressing him into the mattress. And he heard a whisper right above him. "Let me wear you!" Armin screamed and swung his arm through the air. The room light snapped on. He didn't even remember hitting the switch. And whatever it was gone. But the next morning, when he looked in the mirror, he noticed something that made him feel sick. On his collarbone, there were faint smudges. Like fingerprints. Dark, dusty fingerprints. And on the floor near his bed, there were small black marks. Footprints. Not shoe prints. Bare footprints. Leading from the corner of his room to his bed and back again. Armin moved apartments. He changed jobs. He tried to forget. But he told me sometimes, when he's walking alone at night, he'll feel a sudden urge to look down. And when he does, he swears his shadow is just a little too close. Like it's trying to line itself up perfectly. Like it's practicing. Like one day, if he slips up, if he looks away for the wrong second, it'll step into place. And he'll be the shadow instead. That's the thing about stories like these. They don't end with a clean answer. They end with someone leaving, running, hiding, hoping distance is the same as safety. But if any of this is real, if black magic is real, then maybe some things don't care about distance. Maybe they don't care about time. Maybe they only care that you notice them. And once you do, they notice you back. Which story scared you the most? Comment below and subscribe for more true horror stories.